Hi, everyone. This is Ellen from the Astrology Journal. I want to talk about the Scorpio full moon. So today is April 23rd when I'm recording this, and we are having a full moon April 23rd at 7:49 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So yet to come, but not too far away. You can see here is a chart. So we have a T-square between involving the sun and the moon, so the full moon, and they're making a T-square. Both of them are squaring Pluto. So that suggests that this has a lot to do with what I would call developmental challenge or a challenge point. And if you think about it in terms of development, the way that I understand it, the way that development works is, we are born and there are certain things that we have to do. We're naturally kind of programmed to do these things. Those set the foundation up for the next thing. And of course, we need the right environment around us to be able to succeed at that. And then that leads to the next natural unfolding. And that represents a challenge. If you think about the little baby starting to pull itself up, or the little baby, it's like they've figured out how to pull themselves up, but they're trying to figure out, how do I make it from this place, secure place where I can put my hands, to this place that's a little bit further away, and there's no place to put my hands in the meantime. So it's like a developmental challenge, but depending on how far that gap is, we're up for it. We want to do that. We're designed for it. And so that's kind of what it is. And the question is the environment such that it's the challenges we meet are doable and possible and are actually helping us grow? Or are they, either not challenging enough or overly challenging such that they're beyond what we can actually realistically do, and so we can't actually develop. And so the idea of challenge too, so there's a positive side to that. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and we naturally want to show up for those challenges, and that the baby naturally wants to reach for things and touch things and try to get things. That's kind of natural. It's not a problem, I don't believe, for the baby. But if we don't get the support that we need, the right support that we need in a sufficient enough amounts, we aren't maybe able to meet those challenges. Or if we're not, so whether it's environment that doesn't ask us to that sort of doesn't help us meet challenges, doesn't help us see challenges and rise to them, or whatever the thing is, or if they're simply too much and we can't possibly meet it. So if that's been the case, then when we meet these next developmental challenges, we're perhaps lacking a foundation that we need to be able to meet this next foundation. And so then it might feel like more like a crisis in the way we typically think of crises. And to me, that we can see that as a positive, in that it's showing us what is missing. It's showing us a plank that's missing. So how can we identify what that plank is, and can we start to look at that and say, how can I what is this foundation, and what is required for me to be able to meet this foundation, and how might I start to work towards that to be able to do that for myself? So that's how I think about the squares and this idea of challenge. So again, this idea of the moon and the sun and the moon and Pluto in this T-square representing this idea of challenge. Pluto represents the soul, and the moon is the sort of the emotional, it's like the egoic expression of Pluto, but that egoic expression is really about our emotional experiences as we move through this life in a way. And don't quote me on that, but that's just an idea that I'm presenting right now as a way to think about ego. But I think that's a really complex topic. In evolutionary astrology, ego is not seen as a problem. It's seen as the necessary focal lens for us to be sort of our own unique person in this life. And if we don't have that lens, we're just sort of we have no focus. There's nothing clear or anything like that. So anyway, okay, so let's go on. So the moon is in Scorpio, excuse me, it's ruled by Pluto. So the moon is looking to Pluto for direction. And Pluto and Scorpio are both about intensity and depth. And Pluto in Aquarius, it's looking at individuation. And it's looking about, it cares about freedom. So we want to become, like, if you think about the butterfly, so Pluto is about metamorphosis, Scorpio is about metamorphosis. If we think about the butterfly, it's in that cocoon, and it's sort of been through this battle in this cocoon, and it sort of starts to come out, and it wants to, it needs to dry off, which is interesting. Aquarius is air. It needs to dry off its wings, but then it's free to fly. So we're looking, as a soul, at the soul level, we're looking for that point of freedom. The caterpillars, they're all sort of in a mass, and they're all sort of chewing their way through the leaves. There's no distinguishing thing with the caterpillars, but the butterfly, they go off and they fly, and they're all sort of their independent, individual beings out there. So that's kind of the evolutionary ask, or the trajectory, or the emphasis that's happening. One way to think about it. So there's an interesting thing going on in this chart. So there's the sun and the moon. So I didn't put the sun here because it was a little too cluttered, but the sun is here. It's opposed to the moon. So that's the full moon. And there's an interesting thing going on with the moon. Angling off it on both sides are these keen-decile aspects. Now, you could argue these aren't officially aspects. So the keen-decile is a minor aspect. It's 165 degrees. And the question is, what are the orbs? What are the allowable orbs in any aspect, but especially the minor aspects? And I used to just allow a 1 degree orb for the keen-decile in particular. And by the way, people pronounce that Quinta Chile too, but I always pronounce it the keen-decile. So I don't know what the correct pronunciation is, but keen-decile is what I say. So I always just used a 1 degree orb. But when I looked at the chart for the formation of the Iroquois Nation, which I talked about in the last video, there were keen-deciles, or when I looked, there were keen-deciles that had, I understood they were in operation because of the events, because of the energy of the events. And that keen-decile, I think there was one in particular, was wider than 1 degree. It was wider than I would have expected. And I think there were a couple of minor aspects too that were kind of at play, that had wider orbs than I expected. So I'm choosing to call these keen-deciles that they're in effect. So especially between Uranus and the moon, and between the moon and Chiron. Between the moon and Chiron is 166 degrees, give or take. I'm not exactly sure. And between Uranus and the moon is 163 degrees, give or take. I didn't look at the minutes and seconds. And Pluto is Jupiter, is 162 degrees. So that to me feels a little wide. However, it's conjunct Uranus, and in all cases, Uranus, Jupiter, and Chiron, the moon moves fast. So not long after this full moon perfects, I would think within a day, the moon is going to perfect this keen-decile with Chiron, and this keen-decile with Uranus, and this keen-decile with Jupiter. So I'm considering these in effect. I'm considering these relevant for this chart. So the keen-decile, the way that I think about the keen-decile is similar to the way that I think about the inconjunct in a kind of a big picture perspective. So essentially, I see them as supports for the path, and the path is represented by the opposition. So if you think for the inconjunct, I did a video on this, and the way that I think about it is so the inconjuncts angle off a little bit, they're a little bit wider angle. So the inconjunct is 150 degrees. If you start at 0 degrees Aries and count 150 degrees, you'll get to 0 degrees of Virgo. So the inconjunct is that angle. And if you think about a straight line between Aries and Libra, then the inconjunct angles off that line, and it does so on both ends. So you would go up here to 150 degrees of Scorpio for the other end. So it angles off, and it's like it provides support for that inconjunct. So the analogy I use is are the cables on the suspension bridge, and the cables come down off of that. So the road is the path, and then the cables come down at an angle to that road, and they anchor into the ground. And their whole purpose, as far as I understand it, is to provide flexible stability for that bridge, so that as all these different forces impact it, it can translate those to the ground so the bridge doesn't break apart. So the inconjunct in astrology is about making adjustments. There aren't any inconjuncts in this chart, actually. But it's about making adjustments. Well, why? Because if we don't make those constant adjustments, the path will break. The path will break apart. We won't be able to continue on our path. Well, the keen decile is more sort of a similar picture, only it's more intense in a way, you could say. It's angled closer. The angle is more intense. And the keen decile is often referred to as the fatal in the natal. So it can be a lot of obsession, but what's the positive? To me, that's a keen decile that's at work, that's out of whack. So what's the positive expression of the keen decile? And the way that I tend to think about it, especially with the moon here involved, is this idea of the baby going through the birth canal. It's getting squeezed on all sides, but the thing is, it has to be squeezed on all sides. There's brilliance to that design. That squeezing sort of pumps all that fluid out of it so that it is being prepared to enter into an entirely new environment. So Pluto and Aquarius entering into an entirely new environment, we could say. And Mercury retrograde, our early environment, Mercury representing this idea of environment too. And Mercury can be considered the lower octave of Uranus. Uranus rules Aquarius. So anyway, but that's the idea, this idea of being squeezed on all sides. And there's a functional, necessary, positive purpose to that. And I would imagine that the baby, perhaps it doesn't feel terrible to the baby. I don't know. But I would think anything that's developmentally appropriate doesn't necessarily feel awful, but we'll notice the pressure and the intensity. And the question is if it's a little out of whack, if the process is out of whack in some way, or if we're out of alignment with the process in some way, that can perhaps feel more uncomfortable. You can also think of the keen decile as like the struts. So the struts in a car, you're going around a bend, and if you didn't have the struts, the car would just, like this really intense bend, the car would break apart, but the struts prevent it from happening. So it's just adding extra stability and support, extra flexible dynamic stability and support for us as we move through this, this path in this particular chart. That's how I think about it. So the keen decile, so it's involving the moon and Chiron, and the moon over here and Uranus and Jupiter. So Chiron is the wounded healer and the wise teacher. And the moon in Scorpio is talking about a lot of emotional intensity, emotional depth, for sure. And this idea of metamorphosis about, as I already talked about, this idea of metamorphosis, we're coming into ourselves as a new being, and that's being shown here by Pluto and Aquarius. The moon is it's in Scorpio, so it's ruled by Pluto. The moon is looking to Pluto for, it's like, well, okay, give me direction. What do I do? Well, the Pluto in Aquarius is interested in metamorphosing, becoming the next level of our design, you could say. So the way that I'm starting to think about this is this idea of squeezing going on, and with relationship to the Chiron, the wound, we perhaps need to be squeezed some so that whatever old wounds are still there, they need to come up and surface for us to be able to work through them so that we can step into this new being, this new I am. Remember, Aries on the natural wheel is the beginning of a new process. And Pisces, we're dreaming that new kind of dream into being that we then walk the path of, starting in Aries. Mars, which rules Aries, is in Pisces. That's the dream, but it's also this time of letting go. So letting go of the old I am and stepping in so that we can step into the new I am. The North Node is also in Aries, so our evolutionary trajectory is towards this I am, and perhaps it's a new I am as opposed to the one we've been journeying with. And what is that one we've been journeying with? Is it actually who we really are? The South Node is in Libra. That can be balance, that can be imbalance, or balance or imbalance. If it's too imbalanced, it suggests to me that perhaps we aren't in relationship fully as who we are, but we figured out ways to compromise to be what other people want us to be, and that's just not going to fly. We need to. You can't. Eventually, that won't work. For relationships to be lasting and sustainable, we both have to be who we are. Bring who we are, and know that. I don't know how to explain that any better. So anyway, the South Node is in Libra. It's ruled by Venus, which is in Aries. So it's saying the South Node is looking to Venus. It's like, okay, how do I be in relationship? And Venus is saying, who are you? Who am I? Know who you are. That's the starting point. Is there anything else to say about this? What I can do, I'd actually, there seems like there's more. The sun is in Taurus, by the way, and that's also ruled by Venus, and Venus is in Aries. And again, who am I? The sun is looking to Venus. Who am I? Taurus, so Aries to Taurus is interesting. Aries is, we need, in evolutionary astrology, they talk about needing maximum freedom to kind of figure out who we are. We know who we are on the inside, but what out there in the world resonates with who we are. And so we need freedom to find that, to figure that out. And then once we get to Taurus, Taurus is about narrowing down. So we bring all that sort of experience or that, understanding from Aries into Taurus. And now we sort of like do this sifting and sorting through it. We use our senses to feel into, is this what I want? Is this what I want? Do I like this? Do I like, what do I like? What feels safe and will help me develop, and what doesn't. And so we can't do this process if we don't know who we are. So we can't really do the Taurus process if we don't know who we are. It's really profound when you think about it. If we don't know who we are, we can sift and sort through things, but we don't really have a central kind of core that we're relating things to. So I think it's really significant that the ruler of the sun and the ruler of the South Node are both Venus in Aries. And the other thing to say about Taurus and Libra, so Taurus is the inner side of Venus, and Libra is the outer side of Venus. So the other place to look in terms of this question of if things get imbalanced here, and that's our experience, well, have we been able to establish ourselves sufficiently? And to me, in this chart, that question is pointing back to Aries, who am I? If we haven't been able to establish ourselves sufficiently within ourselves, it's because perhaps we don't have clarity on who we are. So perhaps part of Mars in Pisces has to do with also letting go of confusion, old confusions that have been interfering with our ability to know who we are, and perhaps where that will have, start to, we'll start to be able to have more clarity about all of that. But anyway, I can share so the full moon hasn't happened yet, but I had an interesting experience this morning, an inner experience this morning. I was just out, I was actually walking to the grocery store, and I just suddenly felt this poignant sense of loss, which would be Pisces grief. This sense of, or yearning or longing for something that I didn't get when I was young. And that something that I didn't get was a father, and I loved my father, I adored my father. But he was, of his generation, and in that generation, the fathers all went to work every day, and you never saw them, and you didn't know what they did. So you never really learned about work. You never really learned about how to be in the world. And I just have felt a lot of like that kind of absent father kind of feeling. And so for me, that feels like an old wound that I haven't felt the squeeze or the pressure, but it really surprised me. And perhaps more will come up around this or something else. And perhaps I will feel a little squeezing or pressure. I don't know, but it was significant for me that it happened during this full moon. There's a lot of masculine energy in this chart. So Aries, obviously masculine. Um, the Saturn in the traditional astrology rules Aquarius. So in a way, Pluto is looking to Saturn, you could say. But there's an interesting dynamic between Saturn and Uranus. If I remember correctly, Saturn was a child of Uranus, and Uranus was afraid that Saturn was going to overtake Uranus. So it did something, it didn't want that, and I don't know what it did to Saturn. I can't remember. But Saturn also did its own part. It was afraid its children were going to take over it. And so it ate its children until it couldn't do that anymore. It had to, and I think it's his wife gave him something that forced him to throw everything up, all of his children up. But anyway, there's this kind of interesting dynamic that's going on with this kind of father, perhaps masculine father type figure. And Jupiter, we could also say, represents sort of the mentor, the masculine mentor, the fathering kind of mentor, the teacher, the guru, that sort of thing. And of course, those can be women, but these are Jupiter rules Sagittarius. That's a young sign. So there just seems to be a lot of masculine energy. And there's one more thing that I want to talk about with regard to Saturn ruling. It's so interesting that it rules Capricorn and Aquarius. So Capricorn is our past, and it's the structures that have been created to support others who come along to develop their own mastery. To develop mastery, you could say it that way. Anytime we're talking about structures that have been created, we're talking about the past. So it's what has been encoded from the past that we now rely on to carry us through our current reality. But really, it's anchored in the past. And Aquarius is about the future. And in Capricorn, it's really about mastery. And the mastery path starts with, if you think about painters, they start by copying what the masters before them did. And they learn that. And eventually there comes a time where you have to individuate. You have to become your own, create your own style, your own unique approach to things. And ideally, this is something that just arises from within and then naturally starts to evolve. So Saturn, so in Capricorn, we rely on past structures. On an Aquarius, we don't know what the structures are. It represents the unknown because nobody has ever been us. Nobody has ever lived us. We are all, every single one of us, completely unique and individual. And so nobody can chart that course for us. Only we can. So the question is, we each have to find our method or our process of testing the waters of the unknown, taking steps in the unknown. How do we do that? In the Aquarius rules the scientific method. And so that's one example of this. The scientific method is about seeing something in the material world and saying, I don't understand what this is. This is new territory. What's going on here? And it has this whole process. You formulate a question, you design an experiment, you conduct the experiment, you get the results of the experiment and see, do these results confirm what I thought, or do they suggest something else? And so then you do it again. But that's a process of moving through the unknown. And in some ways, each of us perhaps have to find our own process. Aries is about, and Mars has to do with the pioneer. We're going into new territory. Nobody's been there before. And it takes courage to go there. It takes courage to be who we are. It takes courage to be our own unique individuated selves. And so I think the keen styles to me suggests pressure and perhaps a feeling of discomfort as wounds come up. But it could also be a feeling of grace, Pisces, and just sort of these old wounds kind of surfacing. Maybe we'll feel a little grief, maybe a little loss, and maybe it will just sort of clear. I mean, some pregnancies, the baby comes through pretty quick and it's not really very difficult, and some are more, laborious. I haven't had kids, just as a disclaimer there. But anyway, so those are just some thoughts that I have had. I can quickly just show you, I did up these. So you can see there's a lot going on here. There's more going on in the subjective realm than the objective realm. Although there's there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Actually, it's kind of an even split, but it still feels like the energy to me is more in the subjective realm, just because there's the density here, perhaps. And everything has kind of been moving around this way, since for sure since the lunar eclipse. And then you can see here lots more going on in the active, or I'm starting to call this the agentive side than the receptive side. But these are the counterpoints. This south node and this moon are the counterpoints to what's going on here. And the moon is the focal point of this Kindesal trine, I guess is for lack of a better description. And so it's really about going into the depths of our emotions and healing wounds there, I think is the energy at play. And then you can see here in the quadrants, identity is really the one that's more focused on. In fact, all of the planets that are down here in the bottom in the subjective realm are in that identity I quadrant. So that's really emphasized. And again, the counterpoint with both Libra and Scorpio. So Libra is the other. It's it's our relationship. Both Libra and Scorpio have to do with our relationships. Libra, again, the partnership, and Scorpio is when we merge with another. And so to the extent that we have not had enough of ourself involved in that, we have not known who we are, we haven't brought who we are, that things can be coming up to help us rebalance that. And nothing going on in the expression me realm. So that's interesting. And the second most dense quadrant is what I call the greater good. The Aquarius represents the collective, but to me that felt like specifically, like a lot of people think of this quadrant as a collective, but to me, that's Aquarius. And so if we include Capricorn and Pisces also, what's a term that encompasses all of that? And to me, it's it has to do more with the greater good. And I say our, you could say us. That's fine too. But our feels more inclusive to me. Us feels like a bunch of people and it's us. But our feels like it's, I don't know, there's a sense of... I guess there's a sense of ownership, but maybe that doesn't need to be there. Anyway, so that's it. And you can see here, this was the lunar eclipse. You can see a lot going on here and a shift. It started to shift down to identity in the solar eclipse. So that's kind of a continuation of the energies in a way that's been going on. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. I hope this was helpful. I hope there was something useful here. If you appreciated this, if there was something worthwhile for you in here and you liked it and feel so motivated, like my video, that really helps me feel like it matters what I'm doing, and it does help the channel. And then subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Okay, take good care. Bye.